Hello and welcome to the Farming Today This Week podcast. In this episode, after a torrid few years, new rules to make life fairer for pig producers.
What really became very apparent during this crisis, a lot of producers either didn't have a contract, a written contract, or what they did have was just not fit for purpose.
Should the release of game birds be limited because of bird flu?
If there's no shoot, there's no gamekeeper, there are no pickers up, there are no beaters, that's the end.
And cutting the rush.
There we get the knife right on the riverbed. Gather up the butts. And then because it's so shallow, I've got to walk over to the pump.
But first,
Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls. He liked thick giblet soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hencods roes. Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidney, which gave to his palate a fine tang of faintly scented urine.
That extract from James Joyce's Ulysses was sent in this week by listener Paul Miller, because all this week on Farming Today, we looked at what happens to the fifth quarter. That's the bits of meat we don't tend to eat. Tastes have changed since Mr. Bloom's time. So while we like steak, we're not so keen on tripe. We eat a lot of chicken, but not the feet. To both reduce waste and get the best price for the whole animal or bird, we need to do something with the offal. In ag speak, this is carcass balance, balancing the sale of the popular bits with finding markets for the bits that are less desirable. And those parts that can't be sold are sent for rendering. That's using heat to separate them into fats and proteins to be sold as animal feed, fertiliser, or go into things like cosmetics. Dr. Margaret Bonus, chairman of the International Meat Trade Association.
In the 1950s, liver and kidneys and hearts were staple parts of the diet. That's not the case today. Society has changed and we don't tend to eat that much offal. And if we don't eat it, it either goes to waste or we need to export it.
Given then our changing tastes, how easy is it to balance a carcass?
It's becoming more challenging because of issues around shipping. And also you need to obviously have trade agreements in place with the countries that do eat the pieces that the UK doesn't eat. But there is no doubt that there is demand for these pieces around the world. It's just making sure we have access to the markets to send them there.
And that changes, doesn't it? Because I remember in the past we would talk about the trade in chicken's feet going to China, but we can't do that at the minute.
No, we don't have access to China for chicken products. And there are a lot of people in the industry who would say that is very unfortunate because chicken's feet in the main go to rendering in the UK. There is a small quantity that goes into pet food, but the bulk of them go into rendering, and the price you get from rendering doesn't even cover the cost of production. Whereas if you could export them to China, you could increase their value 12-fold. And they're going to somebody who wants them and who's going to eat them. And that's what it's all about. It's about sustainability, making sure when we deconstruct that carcass, every piece of it is valued somewhere and it's getting it to that market.
Given the complications of international trade, should we be doing more to try and balance the carcass here? So, for instance, we eat a lot of bacon in the UK. We don't tend to eat pig's ears, but I have seen them in pet shops.
I'm not sure that we will ever convince the consumer to start eating the fifth quarter in the quantities that we used to.
How important is carcass balance, just purely from a financial point of view for producers?
We touched on chicken's feet to China. We don't have permission for that, but we do have permission for pork. So we're already sending to China offals, tails, ears, trotters, all those kind of things. And it makes a difference of about £30 to £50 per animal by sending that product to China.
Dr. Margaret Bonus. Well, many of you got in touch to point out how much our tastes have changed. During the war, for instance, cookbooks explaining how to use every bit of the animal were published. And back in the 1990s, nose-to-tail eating made a resurgence. Jenny Jacobs wrote in with fond memories of offal.
My mum would cook a boiling fowl pretty much every week when I was a child. We'd be given the feet as a treat. I remember the texture, really delicious. We'd pick them clean. Same with the neck, though my mum usually had that.
Dr. James Palmer told us that some offal is now hard to find.
Getting hold of sweetbreads or thymus has been a challenge. Why are they so difficult to find?
And Jeff Bates in Derby told us about his memories of the family farm shop in the 50s and 60s.
On Saturday mornings, a special was on. Pig's trotters. Boiled, for ages, I can't recall how long, in a huge tub of salted water, sold in a sheet of greaseproof paper and a paper bag for 6p. With a good sprinkle of vinegar, get 2 forks to pull out all the little pockets of meat from within all the bones and tendons and fat. We occasionally had liver, and I can recall brains on toast being good. The phrase Mum used was that the only waste off a pig was the oink.
Do get in touch about anything you hear on the programme. You can email us farming.today@bbc.co.uk, or you could tweet us on X, where we are at BBC Farming Today. Now, farmers raising livestock inevitably face at some point the problem of what to do with fallen stock. That's animals which have died of disease or some unexplained cause. By law, they can't be buried or burnt on the farm or sent to landfill or left to be eaten by birds. Dealing with fallen stock is a highly regulated activity. The dead animals have to be collected at the farmer's expense by a licensed business without undue delay in order to prevent the risk of disease spreading from residues in the soil, in groundwater or as air pollution. Mary Ward-Lowry has been to a plant in Yorkshire where fallen stock is their stock in trade.
It's a beautiful drive through the rugged landscape northwest of Bradford. This is the Brontes' backyard, just a few miles from their home at Haworth. Tucked away in a crinkle of these windswept moors is a factory that deals with something most of us would prefer not to have in our backyard: Category 1 animal material. That's carcasses that can't be used in any part of the food chain, can't even be used as fertiliser. This is Omega Proteins, part of a suite of companies set up and run by 3 generations of the same family. I'm here to meet the grandson of the founder in his pristine white trainers, Leo Savary.
So we've got various fallen stock collections across the country, 15 to 20,000 farms on our books. So we'll pick them up in small lorries and do local collections. We then take them back to a site where we bulk them up into a large HGV to maximise efficiency for transport, and then we bring them here where the process starts. We have 2 bins for segregation. We have a hard bin, dead stock, and we have a soft bin, which is SRM, specialised risk material, which we call the gut content from an abattoir.
So things like spinal cord and brain.
Yeah, heads for cattle, things like that. So we will back them in, we'll tip them into large hoppers, and then the process starts. We don't physically touch them, then it's all automated process. So it goes through size reduction, you break it down, you crush it, and then you pump it into a cooker where you use steam production to start heating it up and cooking it.
Leo's taking me now into what he calls the cook room. It's loud and it's hot. There's a lot of stainless steel pipes and hoppers at this factory. It's all unexpectedly Willy Wonka. And while the air outside doesn't exactly smell like chocolate, it really doesn't smell that bad either.
To be honest, in here it smells a bit like roast potatoes.
With animal rendering, you're always going to have odours because, that's the nature of the process. We've maximised our odour abatement with oxidisers, with biofilters. We've had lions here before, we've had a gorilla, we've even had whales. So a lot of the time when a whale washes up maybe on the beach, and they will come to a site like this, and we didn't build our bins big enough to handle a 20, 30-foot whale, so it has its challenges. But here, it's got to be dealt with in a reasonable way, and that's what we do. That's an example of the meat and bone meal.
Oh, right, it just looks like sand.
Yeah, that's smaller materials. You get some larger chips, and then you hear them now dropping in the trailer to be taken straight offside. Whatever we want to use for farming, whatever we want to eat, we can eat. Whatever we choose not to eat, our pets can eat. Whatever isn't good enough for our pets can go, so our oil can go to be refined to turn the lights on. It can be made into electricity. It can power houses. It can even go to fly an aeroplane. The solid matter that comes from this factory goes up to my site in Cumbria, where I can then burn it through a combustion process to create steam to feed that factory with electric and steam, rather than using natural gas. Reduce the carbon footprint. So everything is reused.
Mary Ward-Lowry reporting there. And there's more on carcass balance. Just search for Farming Today on BBC Sounds. And remember, you can set your smart speaker routine to play Radio 4 and wake up with us every weekday morning at 5:45. New rules that give pig farmers and producers more fairness in the supply chain came into force this week. They follow on from similar regulations around milk contracts that were brought in last year. And the aim is to protect against unfair practices, improve transparency and give farmers more control over how they sell their pigs. The new rules require written, signed contracts with clear terms on pricing, duration, termination and dispute resolution, and were drawn up after extensive consultation with pig farmers, producer groups and the wider pig industry. Cass Graham asked Lizzie Wilson, the Chief Executive of the National Pig Association, why these new regulations are needed.
I don't know if you remember, we suffered a bit of an unprecedented crisis from around 2020 to 2022, 2023, really triggered by a labour shortage in our abattoirs caused by COVID, then Brexit, then COVID again, and then the war in Ukraine, inflation, increase in input prices, and all this had a massive impact on the pig sector. And we ended up losing collectively in excess of around £750 million. And in the process, we had pigs backed up on farm, we had around 60,000 healthy animals culled. And what really became very apparent during this crisis is that a lot of producers either didn't have a contract, a written contract, or what they did have was just not fit for purpose. Quite often, pigs were bought and sold on a verbal agreement, a handshake. If there was something written, it was generally just sort of an email thread, but there was no actual legal binding contract in many, many different scenarios. And therefore, the producer or the farmer was quite often extremely vulnerable when sort of business as usual was disrupted, really, with some sort of major event, as we saw with the crisis.
These new rules, what kind of a difference do you think they'll make to confidence in the sector?
It definitely gives them a legal route with regards to dispute resolution and complaining. There are certain aspects that now have to be agreed in writing, like how the producer is paid, how that price is formulated, how long the contract is, how many pigs per week and the numbers, what happens if one party doesn't meet that. You know, there can be no changes unless it is agreed by both parties in writing. So I would hope that it does provide a little bit more confidence and we will start to see kind of risk and reward more proportionately distributed throughout the supply chain.
Lizzie Wilson from the National Pig Association. Shooting clubs on Salisbury Plain say they may have to close because they can't get a licence to release game birds. For clubs to be able to release the birds on or near protected areas, like the Plain, they need a special licence from the government body Natural England, and that's now harder to get because of the threat of bird flu. BASC, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, says the licensing system is legally flawed. It's issued legal proceedings against Natural England, while the RSPB has called for all game bird releases to be stopped this year because of the risks. Well, in the meantime, clubs say no shoots means no money coming in, which means some, like the Bulford and Tidworth Garrison shoot, are at risk of folding. BBC Wiltshire's political reporter Kelly Morgan reports.
Shooting clubs rear and release game birds for sport.
Got birds flying into this wood strip.
Mark served in the army for nearly 40 years. He says being involved with shooting changed his life. Now he feels he may lose his job.
I've got 5 dogs. They are my livelihood. I'm also a gun dog trainer. I would have to get rid of my picking up team because I wouldn't be able to employ them any longer.
Shooting clubs need a licence to release game birds. In the absence of general licences, DEFRA have tasked Natural England to assess applications on a case-by-case basis. Bulford and Tidworth Garrison shoot haven't been successful because it says these birds could infect protected species, like the stone curlew that live on the plain. Hugh Carter's the chairman and director of Bulford and Tidworth Garrison shoot. Avian influenza has broken out on shoots in Devon, but Hugh believes it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach.
There have been no cases of avian influenza here in Wiltshire, other than one in the not too distant past. What we feel is that the assessment over the whole country is at one level, but not reflecting what's going on Salisbury Plain here in Wiltshire.
Natural England have said,
"We have been tasked by DEFRA with considering individual licences for game bird releases. But given the very high risk of transmission of this deadly disease, government policy makes clear they can only be granted if there is evidence of exceptional circumstances and clear measures to reduce risk of transmission."
Legal action by BASC against Natural England means this issue will rumble on.
If there's no shoot, there's no gamekeeper, there are no pickers up, there are no beaters, there's no food going to the community, no field sports going to the military community. That's the end.
Hugh Carter there from the Bulford and Tidworth Garrison Shoot. Katie Jo Luxton, Global Conservation Director at the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, says the release of game birds across the country should now be licensed.
We have grave concerns at how releases are happening at the moment. Very large numbers of game birds are released, so it's about 40 million pheasants and red-legged partridges in an average year and 2.6 million mallards. So it really amplifies those transmission risks and acts as a reservoir over the winter.
You say that these released game birds will become a reservoir, but they won't live long enough, will they?
Well, we don't have good enough data to tell you how many are shot. Very many of them survive. So I'm afraid that assessment isn't correct.
We do have a situation at the moment where if you want to release birds on or near a protected area, you do have to get a licence. And BASC say that whole system isn't currently working. Do you think it's working?
Well, we support the approach that's been taken this year because obviously these protected areas have been identified for important birds and many of them are vulnerable to things like avian flu, birds of prey that might be scavenging or predating on pheasants, hobby and quail that are susceptible within some of these sites on Salisbury Plain, as well as the stone curlew.
There will, though, be an impact, won't there, on those wild bird populations if these shoots close and you don't have gamekeepers controlling predators and so on?
Well, managed game shoots can play a really important role in conservation, but if we can have a proper licensing system where we have a really clear understanding of what birds are being released where, when and to what standards, the whole system could work much better for the game industry as well as for conservation.
The club points out that the current system doesn't really take into consideration, they feel, their biosecurity measures, which in this case they say are better than those recommended by the government. So is that a fair way to judge? Should it be on a more case-by-case basis, as they would argue?
No, I'm afraid I don't agree with that. We've got very high levels of avian flu circulating in wild bird populations, and we're actually pretty concerned that there is no regulation at all of the mallard population. 2.6 million mallards are estimated to be released for shooting. We think the best solution would be proper licensing of rear and release game birds altogether.
Katie Jo Luxton from the RSPB. Marnie Lovejoy, Deputy Director of Conservation at BASC, the British Association of Shooting and Conservation, says there's no need to limit releases.
We have to remember that it is in no shoot's interest to have avian influenza on their ground. So that is why biosecurity is taken very seriously on game farms and game shoots. If you restrict game bird releasing in a disproportionate way, you are removing very important habitat management and predator control measures that actually benefit the very bird species you're trying to protect in the first place.
There is a risk, though, isn't there, when we have bird flu around, that by bringing in more birds, you can just make the situation worse?
So there is a risk in relation to almost all countryside activities. So walking your dogs in the countryside, having visitors on bird reserves, all of that poses a risk in relation to avian influenza. Disease transmission is not simply a numbers game. It depends on how contacts and game birds are managed. So what is important is proportionality. We need to make sure that we take risk management steps to minimize these risks to an acceptable level. We believe Natural England is looking at that very short-sightedly. They are only looking at a potential disease risk without looking at the bigger picture. Conservation and ecosystems are complex, and we believe that there is a lack of nuance in this decision-making.
We heard Katie Jo Luxton there from the RSPB, who'd like to see licences extended to cover all shoots. What impact do you think that would have?
Well, It's unnecessary, first and foremost, because there is a whole range of legislation and rules already in place in relation to game bird releasing and avian influenza. So we don't believe that further licensing is necessary or would be effective in any way.
Marnie Lovejoy from Basque. Farmers who supply wheat to Britain's bioethanol plants are facing an uncertain future following the government's decision not to supply a rescue package to the industry. The company that runs the biggest plant, Vivergo Fuels, told us earlier this year it would be impossible to compete with subsidised American ethanol after the trade agreement with the US promised to scrap tariffs on imports. Bioethanol is added to the E5 and E10 petrol you see at the pumps to reduce its carbon emissions. It's made by fermenting wheat to make alcohol with animal feed as a byproduct. The government said the plants have faced challenges for some time and that it's worked closely with the companies since June, but that it's decided not to support them in the national interest. Vivergo Fuels described the decision as deeply regrettable. 270 people work in the two plants, and the decision is also expected to lower the price of wheat, as more than 1 million tonnes a year went into the plants. Now, a shameless plug for a programme you can hear tomorrow morning here on BBC Radio 4. On the hottest day of the year, I joined Harvest, but no air-conditioned combine cab for me. No, it was feet first into the River Ouse in Bedfordshire.
Right, OK, let's sit down if you're happier. It's very shallow, as you can see. Come on, Archie. You can see how clear it is. Come on, Archie. My name's Felicity Irons, and my business is called Rush Matters because it does.
So what kind of rush are we talking about here? Because it's head height, isn't it?
Yeah, this is true English bulrush. It has a tiny little sprig-like flower, and the rush is bottle green.
It's a slightly surreal sight because you've got 3 people working with scythes, long-handled scythes.
They're
in front of the most beautiful old bridge. Yeah. And then every now and again, a really fancy car comes across it and slightly ruins the medieval feel. So why are you still scything, for goodness sake?
It's a rush knife rather than, I'd say it's a rush knife rather than a scythe, because you're not using a scything action. It's one cut through, because there's no other way of cutting it.
Here you are with your broom handle with a scythe-like blade.
6 foot long ash pole.
6 foot long ash pole broom handle. And then how long is this
It's a 3 foot long blade.
OK, so what do you do?
So we get the knife right on the riverbed.
Simple as that.
Just drop your knife into the water again.
Yeah.
And then gather up the butts. And that's reed warbler. And there's a massive swan's nest over there, so we're leaving a margin. There's a giant white egret, there's 6 downstream actually. Saw a kingfish yesterday, we saw a grass snake, which is still exciting, which means that things are healthy.
Do you plant these rushes, or are they just here?
No, it's completely wild. Yeah.
So this is a free crop for you?
It is, essentially, yeah, it is. We obviously get permission from the landowners and make them something because they don't want paying.
Why do you need all this?
We need a lot of rush. We need over 2,000 bolts of rush a year, because from the rush we make a lot of rush floor matting, log baskets, tableware, hats, shoes, bags. Everything's handmade, absolutely everything. Hand plaited and hand woven and hand sewn, and
hand harvested.
Hand harvested, yeah, the whole process is by hand. And then because it's so shallow, I've got to walk over to the pump.
Felicity's cradling hers like a baby and off she goes. But gosh, it's so physical. You think of crafting as being kind of gentle, don't you? And it's really not.
More on the rush harvest on Your Farm. That's tomorrow morning here on BBC Radio 4 at 6:30. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton. And Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.